So if you'd been on the board, Shazam would never have been built.
Oh, absolutely not. I would have just laughed us out of the room, yeah.
If you sort of parachuted back, what's the advice you would have given to the three of you?
Don't start this business. I mean, you guys are clueless.
Today's guest is Dhiraj Mukherjee, co-founder of Shazam, where he helped grow the business from a simple idea into a global platform with over 100 billion users.
I think what we had in our favor was that we were enthusiastic, we were hardworking, we were, willing to learn, and there was no such thing as impossible. That was the ingredients of us kind of carrying through all the setbacks that we faced along the way. But it was, like hyper naivete that we were suffering from.
Welcome to Enter the Boardroom. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of New Role, home of the Enter the Boardroom community, the destination for serving and aspiring board members. Since Shazam's sale, he's invested in more than 250 AI and technology startups, including OpenAI. With 35 years' experience across technology, financial services, media, and venture investing, he advises global organizations including UBS, Unilever, Eli Lilly, and PwC on building adaptable, future-ready businesses. Dhiraj, welcome to Enter the Boardroom.
Thank you, Ollie.
You've been on an amazing journey as one of the co-founders of Shazam. I was talking to someone just prior to this and mentioned that I was doing a podcast with one of the co-founders of Shazam, and their instant reaction was, I love Shazam. I still use it today. And it has taken on that iconic place, I think, in people's lives. Mm-hmm. And I'm really curious to hear, what have been the three most challenging discussions you've faced on that journey at the board level?
Just three. I need about 30 because our journey lasted 18 years and it was such a roller coaster ride. And, even as you ask the question, it brings flashbacks of all these tough decisions that we had to face. Okay, let me see if I can pick three. The first one, for instance, should we destroy our revenues? So the problem with Shazam was it was a perpetual quest for a business model. And when we started out, we charged users to dial a 4-digit code to identify music. And they get a text message with the name of the song and the artist. And half the time, the text message would get lost. And the other half of the time, we weren't quite sure if it was the right answer or not. But at one point, many years later, after the iPhone had launched and the App Store had launched and Shazam was an app, we could actually charge for it. But one of our competitors decided to go free. And we had a big decision to make, which was, do we yield the market effectively to this competitor or do we go free ourselves? And that was a very big one. And at the end of the day, no regrets, but that was a scary moment. Another one sort of going back in time was when we had done our Series B in 2005 and the funding market was an absolute disaster. And we had a choice to make, which was live to fight another day or switch the lights off. And in order to carry on, we had to do the unthinkable, which was sell our technology to a third party who could use it for B2B to monitor what songs were played on the radio, for instance, leaving us with just a license for the consumer business. That was a really tough moment as well. Just three, you said. Okay. Actually, the very first one was when there were three of us. And we literally just started the business, just an idea, a bunch of PowerPoint, trying to raise money from angels. And we faced a critical decision is, do we invest in a projector or not? And we had to take a formal board vote. And two of us voted, yes, we make this investment. And then we raised, $1 million and the rest is history.
Can we start with that last one? Because I think for founders early on in their journey and board members of founders early on in their journey will be really interested in that dynamic between early stage founders. And I think past guests of Enter the Boardroom have talked about how if you ever actually have to take a board vote, something has gone wrong.
Exactly.
Curious to hear how you now reflect on that dynamic with the benefit of hindsight and a lot more experience since. Was a board vote really needed, or was there something else that needed unlocking?
That's a fantastic question. I guess that it's about finding the balance between being scrappy and improvising, and then coming across as polished and professionals. And to a certain extent, every startup tries to punch above its weight to pretend that they're further along, that they've thought things through, etc. And that illusion almost, I think, is really important. And then you have the reality, which is you can't really afford it, and you're dipping into funds which you haven't actually banked, or are hoping it will come through before the end of the month so you can hit payroll. And those kinds of trade-offs and decisions, I think, never go away, or certainly in our case, they never went away till we exited. But I think it's symptomatic of the journey, which all startups face, the uncertainty, the setbacks which you can't anticipate. You're always trying to be one step ahead of the game. But at the end of the day, in our case, the joke was Shazam was always 2 years away from success. And I felt that projector was the turning point for the next 2 years. It really set us up to, get our fundraising off to a flying start.
I'm guessing you were one of the ones who voted for the projector.
Oh my goodness, it's turning into one of those interviews. Yes, I confess.
What if you sort of parachuted back into that discussion, knowing what you know now as a board member, and you were sitting around that table? What's the advice you would have given to the three of you?
Don't start this business. I mean, you guys are clueless. I mean, I'm not quite sure what we were thinking back then. I mean, we weren't thinking much, obviously. We were just naive. But I think what we had in our favor was that we were enthusiastic, we were hardworking, we were, willing to learn, and just, there was no such thing as impossible. That was the ingredients of us kind of carrying through all the setbacks that we faced along the way. But it was, like hyper naivete that we were suffering from.
So if you'd been on the board, Shazam would never have been built?
Oh, absolutely not. I would have just laughed us out of the room. Yeah.
That's an interesting paradox, actually, that the sort of the sensible person bringing value as the board member is potentially the thing that's going to stop the value being created. How do you think about that now as a board member?
I mean, I should also confess that I suffer from a lot of the after effects of being an entrepreneur. So I'm an incurable optimist, for instance. And I think that's useful when you are part of a startup board, which is you have to look at the positives in the situation. I think the questions to us would be, what would it take for this thing to get off the ground? What would it take to make this plan feasible? Like, what would need to happen in order to succeed with this particular strategy? And I think that's where a board member with experience can be really helpful, to look at that in a more level-headed, clear-eyed way, rather than sort of muddling through the challenges one by one. So I think it's a combination of caution, as in, here's the things which can go wrong. What can you do to avoid those? And second is to fuel the energy, the optimism, the can-do, the learning on the job, etc., which is native to all founders that I've ever encountered.
So take it as a given that they will achieve what they're setting out to do, and then help them structure the glide path of how they might get there.
I'd put it slightly differently, which is there's many possible paths to success, but there's many more which lead to ruin. So it's navigating around the well-known minefield of things which can ruin you, and finding one of several possible paths. But that's always a process of discovery and exploration. So I think the two things which a early stage board director can do badly wrong is to say you can't do it, or you can do it. I think both of those are wrong. And so I would never advocate to be negative, and I would never advocate to being, a relentless cheerleader. It's about encouraging the management team to make their own way, because these things are never a snapshot. It's a movie, and as the movie progresses, the plot can change, and it's having the experience to know what will lead this to have a happy outcome, which can be in different flavors, versus a tragedy of which, there's a lot more precedent.
Did you have a board member at that point of the journey, or at what point? Talk to me through how the board evolved for you.
Yes. So we were blessed with some fantastic early investors and board members. And we had to convince people that, for instance, the technology would work. And one of our early investors was Brent Townsend, who was the inventor of the 56K modem. And he was a fantastic, both scientific genius as well as someone who was just a level head and could ask, good questions, which forced us to think clearly about how we were building the business. One of our other early investors was Simon Murdoch, who was the founder of Book Pages, which later became Amazon in the UK. And Simon was like a father figure to us because he had a PhD, he had built businesses, he could see our strengths and weaknesses, even though, of course, we were much, much younger. And again, we've stayed close, to this day. So I think you need that combination of a person who has a level of faith in you to put their money in, a level of being able to coach and guide so you can grow from there, and a level of challenge so they ask tough questions which make you a better executive.
Can you remember a moment where they asked you a question that really unlocked things for you?
I think that as a founder, you see the world from inside out. So my idea, my company, my team, my product, this is the market I'm going after. I think what a board member can effectively contribute is the outside in, which is, what does the world look like? How do your customers operate? What are their constraints? How does their procurement process work? What is their process to ensure security before they deploy a piece of SaaS software? And those perspectives are, in one sense, framed as risks, as in there's a risk you won't be able to sign up any mobile operator because you're a 5-person startup and you don't have any of the procedures they will look for. But the flip side to that is, say, what would it take to actually get a 4-digit short code from every single mobile operator in the UK? This is what you guys need to do, hint, hint. And so it depends on how you frame it. So it's not about, I've seen exactly this problem before. It's about, I've seen this kind of mindset before, which you haven't because you're an entrepreneur and I'm a seasoned board member.
It reminds me of one of our past guests talked about a question that's always stuck with me, which was, whose budget does this sit in? Because if it sits in marketing versus CFO finance, it's going to be a very different discussion, which I've really always thought was a very helpful way to think about it outside in.
Yeah.
You talked about pricing and that second most challenging discussion you went through where you were trying to work out whether to offer it for free or to bring sort of some pricing into it. Can you talk us through how the board helped you on that journey? Because it's one many founders wrestle with.
The first thought that we had when we started Shazam was that people would identify music using their mobiles and then buy CDs. The problem with that was that no one was buying CDs. They were just downloading music for free from Napster. So we didn't have a business model starting out, which is generally a flaw in a business. So one of our investors politely said to us, maybe you should consider a viable business model. And so we decided to charge users for the use of the service through a reverse charge text message, which was the best thing available at the time. The problem was that the mobile operator would keep about 60% of the revenue which was generated, and there was a cost to sending out the text message as well, leaving us with pennies on the pound. But it was a good start. We need a lot longer than you have available if I wanted to cover all the different iterations of our business model. Part of the challenge was that the music industry crumbled in the time that we were setting up Shazam because of the shift from physical CDs and paid for music to much more digital music, and piracy was rampant at the time. But I think that what our board members helped us to do was to explore more broadly, where's the money? So we did things like, for instance, preload on handsets which were being shipped in South America. We sold ringtones to unsuspecting consumers who subscribed for the ringtone which corresponded to the most Shazammed track of the week. We said hallelujah when iTunes launched, and now people, instead of buying an album, which they didn't, could identify a song and then buy a single track. And so we generated hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue for for Apple at the time. But again, we only kept a small part. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we learned the hard way to be nimble in terms of business models specifically, but more broadly about the commercial trajectory of the company. And that came from investors not wanting to lose their shirts and keeping a level head and being able to see month after month, what did the P&L look like? Were we living just on hopes and dreams, or was there some actual prospects of the cash flow coming into the bank account? And that is valuable. You learn this as I did in the classroom of an MBA. It's quite different when you've got 70 or 80 employees who are depending on you for their salaries.
But so those sound like different ways you could monetize the product.
Yeah.
For a board member listening to this who's sitting on the board of a company who's trying to get their heads around how to do pricing, what would your guidance be now as to how to go about that in as structured and low risk way as possible?
I mean, the way I think about pricing is both strategic and tactical. And what I mean by that is, what's the signal which comes from pricing? And then there's lots of different choices one can make about where to position oneself in the market between premium or, a mass product, for instance. The pricing strategy then automatically affects penetration. So does one want a small but highly profitable niche, or do you want to hoover up a much bigger chunk of the market? Which then, of course, dictates both the end state of the business, but also the funding requirements. So a premium niche pricing approach is generally less capital intensive than a mass market land grab approach, which is also informed by what's the competitive dynamic. And we were in a consumer business, and consumers famously, don't want to pay. But if you go down that path, then you end up, driving things down to zero quite frequently, and it's difficult to get out of that zero box. The other aspect of it is the actual execution, and what I mean by that is what is the rate card, or what is the list price, versus how do you show price flexibility, or what is your dynamic pricing policy. And the best thing, of course, as in the case which I've learned a lot from already, which is keep doubling until they start walking away. You have to be in a luxurious position to do that. But to a certain extent, that's a testament to your product or the niche that you found, if you can dynamically price upwards. And sometimes it's just a matter of testing. It could be, a feature which is on a roadmap, which actually has value to a segment which is not your primary segment. But if you test that and you find that actually they will pay twice as much or 4 times as much, then maybe that's where the business lies, and not what the starting point was. In our case, we didn't have that kind of flexibility because we were a one-trick pony, as one of our board members called it. We just did music identification over mobile phones. And we were pressed on this point. So we had several investors ask us, have you thought of doing a B2B business? And we said, no, we haven't thought about it, because if we want to focus on the consumer side. It turns out that the B2B business, saved us, because actually people were willing to pay to use a very robust music identification algorithm operating in a clean environment, so that artists could get paid royalties which they were due. So is that a pricing point? No, it's a strategic point. But pricing can be used to determine strategy by testing in different segments or customer groups with different pricing strategies and policies. So yeah, I think it's a great way to discover markets which might not be obvious with a more blinkered view.
I love that. So you're struggling with B2C, and you effectively have this pivot into identifying this B2B opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
What always terrifies me, both as an investor and an operator now, when you're faced with decisions like that, is when do you know you're flip-flopping versus when actually should you be taking a pivot like that? Can you take us inside that discussion, and what gave you the confidence to say, actually, we're going to take away our 100% focus from trying to make the B2C work, and actually we're going to give this B2B a go?
So in our case, the forcing function was the threat of bankruptcy. So if we hadn't done that, then you'd be saving an hour in your day to day. But because of that, we didn't execute it ourselves. We actually sold the technology to a third party who developed the monitoring service. And the idea had certainly been put in our heads before. So it wasn't a new idea. It was just that we finally committed to making it happen. I would say that there's no simple answer between the trade-off between focus and exploring other opportunities. If there were, then it would be too easy. I think that what's helpful is to what you said, which is to follow the money. If one sees expressions of interest where customers are willing to pay, even if the product is not real or the service is not real, it's just an idea, it's a demo, it's a prototype, etc., then that's a really useful signal. And again, in Shazam's case, people would walk into record shops and hum the name of the song to some, hapless, employee trying to identify music. And so that's a signal that there is actually a demand there. And so that kind of thinking, I think, can be used by startups who are exploring, where else they might go with the assets which they have on the table already.
It's interesting how you talk about the threat of bankruptcy as a forcing function. It reminds me of a past guest, Nick Jenkins, the founder of Moonpig, who talked about a pivotal moment in his journey when they were facing bankruptcy, and one of his board members asked him, "Why are you selling your cards for $1.99? Why not sell them for $2.99?" And he'd been fixated on $1.99, and suddenly this sort of necessity forced him to relook at some of the assumed value. It makes me think, is there a way the board members can help founders in that situation unlock some of those decisions before needing the threat of bankruptcy? Or do you think it is that precipice that you need as a forcing function to help you discover unlocks like that?
No, I think a good board member would look ahead, and the price which you can command is related to the pain which is felt and the depth of the budget. So if you can find sharp enough pain and deep enough budget, then you can, take advantage in terms of creating a service. In my case, we're talking about a consumer service. So if a consumer expresses pain, then it's probably too late, because then there'll be a solution for that. It's when it's a hidden pain, when it's something which they can't actually articulate. So I describe Shazam as a little bit as like a back scratcher, which is, it's bothering you, but not so much that you're asking for help or calling emergency services. And when you can create a back scratch, then people thank you for it. Now, it's the same principle, I think, in B2B or other domains, which is, can you identify real pain in customers who have proper budgets, but which they can't actually articulate? And to a certain extent, that comes from if you know the domain. And then you can, put yourself in your customer's shoes and sense and solve their pain before they can. Or it can be through a process of discovery, which is, here's my first version of the product. What else is bothering you? Oh, I see. And then literally stealing their ideas and building whatever it takes to, go from there. And both of those are, fair and viable. But no, the threat of bankruptcy should not be the forcing function. It should be much more strategic than that.
Less than 10% of board roles go through a search firm. The rest are filled by word of mouth through networks built up over years of operating at board level. If you're new to the board world, you're almost certainly invisible to the people filling those roles. That's not a reflection of your ability, it's just how the market works. The Enter the Boardroom community puts you inside a concentrated network of chairs and board members, the connections that turn into opportunities. Visit etb.newroll.com to find out more. So, if a board member comes to you with that question around follow the money, do you think you as founders at that point would have said, oh yeah, of course you're right, we should go do B2B? Or do you think it would have taken more than that?
I think it would have taken more than that. And what's interesting is we had that choice at every point in the journey, and we never took it until we had to. And that does two things, which is either you say as a board member or a prospective investor, these guys really know their mind, or you say they're obstinate and just won't listen. And that's a judgment call, which I think is a tension for every board member, which is, do you want to back an exec who flip-flops? No. Do you want to back an exec who can't be flexible? No. So the gray zone is an art, not a science.
So in that situation, though, it sounds like it would have been better had you reached that conclusion earlier, if that was ultimately the unlock. Is that fair?
Sure. Guilty.
So what could a board member listening take from that? What else would they have needed to have done? Or were you just in that place where you were clear, you were focused on B2C, and therefore it was only that threat of bankruptcy that was going to shift you from that position?
I think that you can only follow success. And it's difficult, I believe, to change course as long as a plan is going reasonably well. And what I mean by that, I watched a commencement speech by Roger Federer at Dartmouth, which is where I went to university, where he talked about winning just 55% of the points which he played, And that's fascinating because he was such a successful tennis player. So I think as a founder, if you're right 55% of the time, then that's pretty good. And if you're saying, well, you're wrong 45% of the time, how about the other 45? Then you can derail a champion, If that winning percentage falls to 45%, then you're dealing with a loser and you need to change your game. But it's not as clear as that, because in business, there's no scoreboard like in tennis, And so this is where I think the perception and judgment and the nuance of a board member comes in, and the dynamic, the interaction with the individual who is either winning the match or losing, and it's not clear which of those two outcomes it is.
Do you feel you found yourself in that situation since as a board member where you're convinced the founding team are locked on to the wrong path and you've had to change them? And can you give an example where you have managed to change them and one where maybe you haven't managed to change them and what your takeaway from that was?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a board member now, with all the gray hair I've accumulated, so I'm unconsciously competent. So I know things which I'm not even aware of. So I will instinctively think you shouldn't do that, or you should, or that's the wrong way, or why don't you do something different? And what I realize is it's really difficult to get that across, because without that experience and context, those words are just words. And so you need executives and management to have enough maturity, wisdom, experience in order for those messages to land and to make sense. I've got a good friend, really smart guy, who came to be known as a Cassandra, because he was constantly flagging up things which could go wrong, to the point where people just tuned him out, and guess what? He was right. So that's a trap one can fall into. What my experience has been, I compare it to my long-suffering golf coach. So I've been taking golf lessons for the last couple of years, and my golf game has not improved measurably at all. I have a wonderful coach who said the same things 15 different ways, but I'm just not being able to incorporate them into my swing. She's right, I'm wrong, and she shouldn't change. I'm the one who needs to, and I'm hopeful that she'll get there. But that's how I feel in my capacity as a board member now, which is, how do I use the right words or get the message across in a context where it lands and can be absorbed, not just empty words or warning bells or instructions or a series of thoughts which don't land properly.
So if I were to paraphrase that, I would sort of, and we've had past guests talking about exactly that Cassandra syndrome, that you can take a horse to water, you can't force it to drink. Are there techniques that you've developed as a board member that have helped you unlock founders in that situation of getting them to drink when they need to?
Sure. I think that there's always a power dynamic, in the sense that when we started out as entrepreneurs and we had board members who were 10 years older than us, they seemed ancient and scary. And use words which we didn't, fully understand. And that's true, I think, anytime you have a more experienced board. But I think there's real value in peer networks, for instance. So you could hear the same thing in different words from a fellow founder who's been through it before, and suddenly you get it. It could be a change in environment rather than the formality of a board meeting. It could be over dinner. It could be by an example, talking about football, for instance, as an analogy rather than talking about the jargon of pricing strategy. So there's a number of different techniques one could try, until either it succeeds or you decide you're no good as a board member if you can't get your message across.
Knowing you're an Arsenal fan, I'm guessing Arsenal come into those analogies. Has there been an Arsenal example that you can share with us that's helped unlock something for a founder?
Oh, okay. So I'm a big Arsenal fan, and the reality is that Arteta this season has built a team of fantastic individual players, but that is not good enough. What you're trying to do is to get the teamwork, and it's the interactions between that talent on the pitch, which is informed by a plan. He's got a method, but then the results are uncertain. You can have a 2-goal lead against the bottom club in the league, and they come back and draw 2-2. That doesn't mean that the strategy is a failure. It doesn't mean the team is incompetent. It doesn't mean the players are useless. That just happens to be an outcome of that specific game. And I think the analogy works for startups as well. You're not going to win every time, but as long as you have that collection of talent and individuals, and then playing in as a team with a strategy which makes sense for everyone, and then you see what happens at the end of the season, or in our case at the end of 18 years, which by the way was far too long, and my apologies to our investors. But that's the art, I think, of the relationship between individuals on the board, the collective on the board, the executives, and playing the long game. So I don't think one can reduce it down to single elements of skill, knowledge, experience, intervention. Those tactics are important, but it's over the course of time and being able to adjust for the context which matters.
You talk about that 18 years being a long time. Mm-hmm. I mean, I tend to subscribe to the view that, there are very few good businesses built overnight, and it takes time to build. Mm-hmm. But what are the interventions that a board member could have made that would have accelerated that journey for you?
What we didn't have was an operator turned board member. We didn't have anyone on our board who had built and scaled a technology business and then became a board member. And I think that would have been really useful, because there are certain dynamics which are common to technology businesses. There are ways that you scale a technology-led organization. And Brent Townsend, who was one of our early investors, played that role to a certain extent, but it was difficult because he would participate remotely, for instance. So I'm a big believer in being in the same room, being able to look each other in the eye, being able to go out and have lunch afterwards to understand your fellow board members' biases, their bad experiences, their passions, and to be able to fill the gaps between each other as well. And I think I've got the great privilege of serving on the board of one of my portfolio companies called Me Vitae. And that's been a fantastic experience, because to a certain extent, I know I'm thinking the same way as my fellow board members, even though I'm coming from a different place and I might have different views. So that individual contribution, but collective joint mission is a beautiful thing, but hard to achieve.
Can you give me an example of that tech scaling insight that would have helped you move faster that you didn't get?
I think that the context which we were operating in was the music industry. And the music industry has complex dynamics when it comes to music rights, for instance, and going through a very turbulent transition from the era of CDs to digital music. And we had plenty of input and guidance because we knew that we knew nothing about the music industry. The other aspect of it was the mobile industry, which was also in transition, moving from, old-fashioned, phone calls to text messages to then the mobile internet, and then, of course, the world which we know today of smartphones and apps and so forth. So that was a big transformation. But underneath all of that, what Shazam was built on was a transformational technology, which Avery, my business partner, invented. But scaling a technology business, hiring the right people, putting in place the infrastructure to be able to scale globally, those are lessons which we could have learned perhaps quicker. And I think today, there's another big dislocation with AI. So the way you used to build businesses in the last 5 years has got nothing to do with how we build them in the next 5 years. So there's no one with more than 3 months experience of the transformational technologies we have access to today. But what I think would really benefit from is somebody who understands how does one jump to the next curve? What does it take to set aside your own experience and preconceived notions and adapt to something which hasn't played out yet. So I wouldn't look for somebody who has necessarily done exactly this before, but somebody who's got the experience of that agility.
So you've now gone on to take on a portfolio role where you work with lots of different startups, both as an investor and a board member. One of the areas I know you're really interested in is AI. Board members everywhere are wrestling with how to get their heads around AI and how to help the organizations they work with get their heads around AI. What's your current approach? And can you give me some examples that bring it to life?
So I have invested in AI for several years now, for 7 or 8 years. What I know about the technical aspects of AI could fit on a postage stamp, but that's not the point. I think that what I'm seeing is transformational technology, which there's no question about. I mean, just for context, I invested in OpenAI in the early days, so I've seen their journey. But the reality is, I think that right now, the bottleneck is human beings and our capacity to adapt. So I suffer from lack of plasticity to be able to get my head around the changes which are taking place. But I know I'm not alone because when I speak to founders, technical founders of startups today, they're drinking from the fire hose as well. And their own teams are struggling to adopt the technology to be as useful as it could be. So my contention now is that if you just try to incrementally get smarter as someone who's more experienced and a board member, that's the road to failure. And I think what one needs is a much more radical transformation and personal transformation. And what I mean by that is I'm a failed computer scientist. When I was a kid, I used to program in BASIC. I found an old CV of mine which claimed that I was going to be a computer science major. It didn't work out for me because I wasn't good enough. But I can now be a computer programmer because the tools are at my disposal, and if you crack open Claude Code, I can be a genius developer compared to 5 years ago, for instance. Now that is an unlock which is accessible to anyone. And I think the time is now for the maker types, the people who want to create things, who can use technology in a way which was frankly inaccessible. And I am not naturally wired in that way. But if I don't, I'll get left behind. And I think that's what boards and board members should be asking themselves, which is, how do I do a radical transformation if I want to start this journey, which is beginning right here in March of 2026 and will play out, I think, for 5 or 10 or 15 years from now.
So you talked about that strategic transformation, avoiding that incremental thinking.
Yes.
in terms of AI. Can you bring that to life for me with an example? Like, what does that actually look like in practice for a board member listening who's trying to grasp that, what sounds quite abstract?
Sure. I think, I'm not sure if this is going to make it less abstract, but I think of myself as a professional speaker and investor. And so my clients tend to be big companies, leaders who are looking to adapt to the age of AI. I invest in dozens and dozens of early stage technology companies in AI and beyond, and try to add value as an investor and board member. Quite straightforward. The way I think about it now is that I'm running an AI studio, which has two purposes: be a better frontier thinker, so I can advise leaders of big companies to go on a learning and transformation journey, and two, add value, which is 10x more than I could, to my portfolio companies by being able to share opinions, form views, look further into the future by using the tools which are at my disposal now in the last few months. Now, that is a conceptual transformation rather than using AI or technology to help me in my business, to flip into a technology first or AI first, and then what are the activities which I can engage in. And so that's a perhaps slightly more tangible example, but I build castles in the sky. So these are just words at the moment. I have seen my portfolio companies, for instance, a company called Spotted Zebra, which is in the recruitment space about skills, and absolutely deliver on their vision of using AI in the hiring process to be able to identify the talent which will be needed in the workforce of the future, using AI to accelerate the screening process and save an order of magnitude of time for the HR function. So that's an example of going from idea, vision, execution, product. And that's what I think both startups need to do, but at an individual level, what board members need to do is to say, how do I flip into a world where technology powers what I'm able to deliver on a much bigger scale or much more effectively?
So start that journey on becoming an AI first board member.
Exactly. Thank you. Gosh, that was much more succinct.
Dhiraj, time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a short question and ask you for a quick response if you're ready. Best book every board member should read, and why?
How about How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie?
And why? Because
I think it's so important to understand how humans think, function, and respond, and it's stood the test of time.
Boardroom behavior that irritates you most?
Wanting to have airtime just because you're paid to be there.
A question every board should ask at least once a year.
Why are we here? And what value can we add next year?
What's a boardroom myth you think needs busting?
Stick to the plan.
Favorite quote?
No good deed goes unpunished.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time, and how has that changed how you behave?
I thought that boards were a source of infinite wisdom. What I realize now is that everyone's learning on the job. How's it changed how I behave? I don't listen to what's being said. I listen to what's not being said. I tune into the gaps rather than what someone is saying.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom, and what did you learn?
I learned that it's easy to both underestimate and overestimate. So you say one thing and you expect it'll work the first time. That's not true. Or you think that something can't be done and you're wrong as well. So I guess that when you see both those happening in the same environment, you realize that you can get things wrong both ways.
And finally, 3 things our listeners should take away from this episode if they take nothing else.
I really believe it's worth thinking about governance early if you are a founder. And I think a well-functioning, well-composed board can make a huge difference. Second is that getting people who are really interested in your journey and who are passionate and excited about it's a journey of transformation and growth if you're a successful founder and business. That makes a huge difference. And then finally, as I was saying before, I don't think it's about the CV and the hard skills. It's about the human aspect and what heart they bring to the board and that group of people around you. Because sadly, all startups will have difficult moments, and that's when you really need the sympathy and support. And I'm blessed because I have a fantastic relationship with many members of my board from Shazam days, despite all the holidays I ruined for them and the sleepless nights we gave them, etc. And I'd like to be able to say the same of the boards I serve on today and in the future as well, is that when the dust have settled, we enjoyed the journey together and not about being a problem solver or a fixer or having a silver bullet. I don't believe that exists.
Dhiraj, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience.
Thank you, Ollie. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
If you want access to the roles that never get advertised, you need to be known in the right circles. The Enter the Boardroom community helps you build that network. Listeners get 10% off. Visit etb.newroll.com and use the code ENTER at checkout.